Ba, 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 ba. Hi everyone, Anthony Fantano here, the internet's busiest music nerd, and it's time for a review of the new Game album, Documentary 2. The Game is a West Coast gangster rapper who has been at it for years now, broke through about 10 years or so ago with his most successful album to date, The Documentary, which this new album over here is the sequel to. This isn't the first time I've reviewed his music. I've been underwhelmed by a lot of his latest output, to be completely honest, so I was looking forward to this new release over here because I thought sort of doing a sequel album, maybe a record with a bit more of a standard to it, would sort of put a fire in Game's belly once again. However, I'm not reviewing this album by myself. I'm going to be doing a discussion type review of this record over here with a fellow YouTube music reviewer, Luke James. There is a link to his YouTube channel down in the description below if you want to check out his stuff. And we're just going to go right into the review with a little shirt change as well. Transition.
Hey everyone, Anthony Fantano here, again, with the power of the internet, with Mr. Luke James. How you doing, dude?
Good, man. How you making out?
I'm good. Invited you on here, talking with you through the magic of the internet.
That's right.
This new Game record, I kind of feel like we can't just simply go into our overall thoughts on the record because it is such a long record, and there's so much context to sort of take into scope with the album in general. And also with the fact that this is a sequel record, which there's kind of a lot of talk about these sorts of things in the hip hop community when it comes to sequel records. I mean, do you feel like there's a certain level of pressure that comes with records like this? Do you generally feel excited when a well-established artist uses a record, or are you very, very hesitant?
Definitely very hesitant. As soon as I heard the Game was going to make the Documentary 2, I thought to myself, here we go again. Because just like with movies and music, sequels don't always come up as good as the original. I mean, Predator was a classic. Predator 2, no one talks about Predator 2, but shout out to Danny Glover. But as far as music goes, Blueprint, a lot of people consider that to be a classic. But the Blueprint 2, on the other hand, that takes a lot of heat, and that was a double disc just like this one. MMLP2, that's another perfect example. That's one that a lot of people are split on because, in my opinion, the first one, that's one of my personal favorite albums. But the second one, I couldn't get down with that at all. So a lot of the time with these sequels, I think a lot of people kind of go into them with lowered expectations.
I agree. I think expectations are lowered, but it's a certain kind of lowered expectation. I mean, I liked MMLP2, but I don't think it's anywhere near as great as the original, obviously. Simultaneously, I feel like people go into these records not expecting them to be better than the original, but simultaneously, it's kind of like these artists effectively hitting the reset button a little bit because it draws more attention to them than if it were just any other Game album, because a lot of his output since like 2010 or so hasn't really garnered that much attention.
Absolutely. And this is 10 years after the first documentary. So, you know, he can do the whole 10-year anniversary type of thing. And I got to agree with you. His past couple of albums, I wasn't too big on. A lot of people feel differently about those. I mean, Jesus Piece, some people think that was one of his better albums. I couldn't get into that. I thought Blood Moon was just some of his worst work, even though that's considered to be more of a compilation. But you look at his first couple of albums, I mean, the Documentary one, a lot of people say it's a classic. I mean, that's arguable. It depends on how you feel. But the impact that had on the Game when it dropped was crazy. Like, it brought the West Coast back. And, you know, just working with 50, all that Dr. Dre production, it was such a great album. And even the Doctor's Advocate, that was a good follow-up. But then, like you said, it kind of fell off a bit. You get these albums like the Red Album. I don't even really remember too many songs off of that one, but I know it wasn't that great.
I mean, from the mid to the late 2000s, as far as like voices on the West Coast go, I mean, Game was essentially the biggest voice on the West Coast. And like you said, I mean, records like the Documentary did bring the West Coast back in a lot of ways. So I kind of feel like I do want to make one more Eminem comparison before we go into the record. While I don't feel like review spoiler that this is as great as the documentary, just like MMLP2 wasn't as great as MMLP1. I do feel like Game did go into this project with, I don't know, a bit more hunger than usual. It's almost as if there was a standard that he was reminding himself that he had to live up to when writing a lot of these verses and delivering these rhymes on these songs.
I can agree with that because you can definitely hear it in his bars, just the way that he flows. I found he was very aggressive. He was really coming at these tracks as hard as he possibly could. He wasn't really bullshitting on these songs like a lot of artists do when they've been around for a long time. Especially one of the other things that worried me about this, not only just the sequel thing, was you look at the track listing and how long it is, which you brought up at the start of this review, and then all the features as well. And there's so many features on here. And then you listen to the album, and a lot of them are very minuscule. They don't bring a whole lot. Like you have Diddy just talking on the end of Standing on Ferraris, just like he did on one of Meek Mill's songs on his last album. I forget which one it was, but he was just, talking like Diddy.
I think it was actually the last track, well, at least one of the last tracks on the record.
Yeah. And even with some of the other features, I know Dej Loaf just does a little part on the end of Step Up, I believe it was, which I actually kind of like that song just because as an 80s baby, that beat took me back to the 90s because I've heard that beat before. I can't place which song it's from, but I know I've heard that.
Yeah, there was some serious nostalgia going on in a few of the samples on this record. I actually think this record is pretty solid from like the first to the intro track to like the fifth track. Everything is pretty solid for me. I mean, I could have done without the Diddy monologue at the end of Standing Out Ferraris, but I mean, the record for the first 5 tracks is super solid, and the instrumentals on this thing are killer, even on a lot of the tracks that I don't like.
He did get a lot of good production on here, but I feel like there were a couple songs that didn't really vibe with me. I didn't like that LA song at all. That to me just kind of seemed like more of a radio mainstream grab. And I've actually heard that same sample flipped on an Exhibit song. I think it's called Family Values, and it's flipped much better than that song. That was probably my least favorite song on here.
I actually heard it. That's one of several samples on this thing that I've heard in other places. Including those really devilish horns from that song, that Screamin' Jay Hawkins song, "I Put a Spell on You." Bum 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 bum.
Yeah.
Bum. There's actually some really obvious sampling going on throughout a lot of these tracks, but I guess I didn't really mind it too much. I mean, the only thing that really bugs me about a lot of these tracks musically and song-wise is that we get a bit of a throwback to cliche R&B hooks that you normally would have heard on a lot of rap albums in the 2000s, which I guess the album overall, I mean, a lot of stuff on here feels like a throwback from 10 years ago. Not only those styles of hooks, but also the fact that we do have such a long, overloaded, very feature-centric album that sounds like there was a huge budget going into this thing, which I think is also proven in the fact that we're getting another disc of this record just a little while after the release of this thing. I mean, it certainly sounds like, and you also look at the producer list on here. I mean, will.i.am appears a number of times, as well as Boy Wonder does a beat on here, and there's a really great DJ Premier instrumental in the track list here. I actually didn't mind LA too much. I actually liked the track a little bit. I felt like the last handful of songs and the first handful of songs are where this album is really at its best, and I feel like Game is toward the back end of this record kind of playing toward a lot of that nostalgia and trying to bring back that old school West Coast sound and getting back to, I guess, the roots of the type of lyricism and the type of music that he grew up on, especially on tracks like Summertime.
Yeah, I really liked Summertime a lot, actually. That was one of my favorite tracks on here, and I was surprised that that was a Mike Will made it production. Like, that sounds nothing like the beats that he normally makes, because he's known for making those bangers, working with Ray Sremmurd. So when I heard his cue at the start, the eardrummers, and then that mellow beat came in, I was like, what? What is this? This sounds like some Jake One production, nothing like he would make. But I really like that song a lot because of the vibe. And I wanted to come back to what you said about the old R&B hooks. That's one thing that stuck out to me on the song Step Up. I was actually listening to that, and my wife was sitting right here, and she goes, "Are you listening to Brandy?" Because there's one part in the hook where the melody comes from Brandy's song. I think it was "I Want to Be Down." And I was like, come on now, this isn't Brandy, but I picked up on that once she said it. And like you said before about how there's so many songs on here, I found that was the biggest weakness here. I found that some of these tracks kind of bordered on filler. The Scott Storch produced one, Bitches Ain't Shit, was just your kind of typical, you know, chauvinistic type of track. But I also thought that was a bit of a missed opportunity if he could have got like Too Short on there or Devin the Dude. To me, that song was screaming for a Devin the Dude verse, maybe even a hook, because that's exactly the type of thing that he does.
No, I agree, and I think sort of what he does with that track topically, I feel like it's almost redundant at that point after he did the song Circles,
Yeah.
where, you know, he had that whole, I guess, a bit of a fight, you know, with his girl about a bunch of random bullshit. Uh, you know, it's just a moment where the album gets super dramatic. I mean, I agree with you with the album being kind of overly long, and there are tracks on here that are most definitely songs that I would categorize as filler. I kind of feel like if the whole middle portion of the album just disappeared, we'd have a fantastic beginning and a fantastic end, and it would meet somewhere in the middle. Although I feel like even though there are a lot of tracks that I don't like at all at the middle point of this record, including Circles. I mean, I don't really care for that track. I think the acting that I guess you could call it in the middle of the track between him and the featured female singer that he has on the song is god awful. The Uncle sketch I thought was kind of hard to sit through, as well as the track with Future, who I thought was maybe the most out of place guest that he had on the whole record. I feel like if the whole middle portion of this record just disappeared, this project would have been so much better. There was also that one cut with what was the name of the track with Jelly Roll, where he was like obnoxiously shouting throughout the entire song, and it just threw off the track entirely. Like just one more moment on here where a feature just ruins a song. I mean, I kind of feel like, you know, wasn't there any point once the album was sequenced that when you were listening through the record, didn't anyone realize that the middle portion of this album sounds entirely different from everything else on it, and it's just not as good?
Yeah, that hashtag song was my least favorite by far. He kind of sounded like a broke ass Little John to me, just the way that he was screaming.
Yeah, and on that same song, wasn't there like he's like rapping, and there's a weird story on there about how he's getting head and his mom walks in and he yells at her,
and he's watching the Goonies.
Yes, and that was the other thing. Like, I listened back to the verse a few times, and I was like, "Is he getting head to the Goonies?" Like, it just kind of felt like he was talking about watching Goonies, and then all of a sudden he's getting head. I don't know if it was happening during the Goonies viewing session or if he had just fast forwarded a little bit.
Well, those two things, I mean, they kind of go together a little bit. I'm not going to hate on the Goonies. I mean,
and the
come
Goonies.
on. Yeah, I mean, Sloth in the background might be a little bit weird, but no, still a classic.
Oh my God. Yeah, and that's kind of one of many lyrical moments on the record that that he just really lost me. I mean, I can enjoy a lot of Game's older stuff because even though it may not be really conscious or super lyrical, there's a certain kind of unapologetic meanness and bluntness to it that I think is really entertaining and really badass and just really, you know, in your face and nasty. And that's the kind of fire that I don't think he's had since like 10 years ago. And it's kind of cool to see it make a bit of a comeback on this record, but still the lyrics do become a bit of an Achilles heel on this album. I mean, I think one of the most glaringly bad lines on the entire record is when I think it's on that Made in America track when he says, "I want it to be easy, but then I realized it wouldn't be easy."
Yeah.
And then he says, "I wanted to be Tupac, but then that might get you shot." And I was like, fuck. What?
Yeah, he definitely reached.
I mean, I can't disagree with what he's saying, but he just puts it in the most, I don't know.
No, I feel you 100%. He definitely had some bars on there that I didn't know what he was thinking. There was on another song where he said something about how he was hitting some girl under the bleachers while she was on her rag, and then he goes, "Oh, blood," and I was like, "Oh, I get it, because blood and blood." Oh, nice one.
That was some classic Game right there, though.
Yeah, but he did come hard on some of these tracks. I think he killed it on the song with Kendrick. I
Mhm.
thought that last verse he had, I thought he went off, but it was kind of weird in that first part when he was doing the acapella, and he did that thing that Game does that a lot of people get annoyed with, where he sort of mimics people, where he kind of does the same thing as the person who's on the track with him. For
Yeah.
example, on Blood Moon, on Black, that had Jeezy and Kevin Gates, who both, sound like they need some Sucrets. So what does the Game do? He kind of puts some of that on his voice and does the same thing. And on this song with Kendrick, he kind of had that high-pitched, tuned-up thing happening on his voice. Did you notice that on that
Yeah,
last verse?
that was right. That was the moment right after Kendrick's verse, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, that was as soon as Kendrick was done rapping and kind of doing his little singing spot. It
And
was
he
funny.
says we need a cappella, Kendrick says, and then he starts.
Yeah, he kicked off the track. Kendrick comes in, and then when the Game reintroduces himself, it was kind of weird because I was like, wait, who am I listening to? Who's popping up
Yeah.
on the track now? Because he had kind of changed up his delivery so much at that point in the song.
And he does that on a lot of songs. I call him the Shang Tsung as rap because he just gets on these tracks and just sucks the soul out of whoever's there and does their same style. He's been known to do this.
Although I thought he did a decent job, and I think I'm going to start, maybe centering a little bit more around some of my favorite moments from the record, past the first 5 tracks. I thought he held his own and did well, and stuck to a concept on the song 100 with Drake, which I liked a lot. I thought Drake came through really well on that song, and I thought, this idea of just being true to yourself and truthfulness was really great. I loved the title track to this thing. I thought the flow that he did on that title track was one of the best flows on the entire record. And I already referenced it, but I thought the kind of laid back and nostalgic and really sentimental tone that he took on Summertime was really great too.
Yeah, the title track was definitely a standout. That Primo production was just classic again, that classic 90s sort of sound that he had on there. And he sounded hungry on that one. That was another one where I thought he was spitting some of his best material. But one of the songs I didn't like, I know we're trying to get into the ones we do like, but there's just these weird moments throughout this album. And it was Moolah, Kanye West on Moolah. I'm sorry, I'm trying to be excited for Kanye's next album, but his little features here and there, they haven't been doing it for me. I liked him on Smuckers on that Tyler, the Creator album. I thought that sounded kind of like the old braggy Kanye that we like. But then he was on that ASAP Rocky song. I wasn't really a fan of what he did on there. And then he gets on this, and he's doing that sing-songy type of flow. And that, Kanye, just, what are we going to get from Kanye?
I wouldn't even call it sing-songy as much as it's just kind of him howling and moaning.
Yeah.
Which he did a little bit on the Travis Scott thing too, although he was like extreme enough to the point where he did kind of jump off the track. He really popped out of the mix, and it was at least entertaining for a little bit. But I hear you. I didn't really like Moolah either. I mean, of course, there were some tracks that outside the middle point of the record I didn't really love, but for the most part, those songs just kind of underwhelmed me a little bit. Just kind of like that Moolah track, like just Another Day as well, which I didn't love, but I didn't think was fantastic either. There were a lot of middle of the road tracks for me on this record as well. I think there were a lot of cuts that just didn't do what I thought this album did best, and that was Game kind of going back, sticking to his roots, playing to his strengths, and instead, when he varies from that, I feel like it's only to do something kind of trendy, and that's when he, is inviting Kanye on. That's when he's bringing Future on. I think the one moment where he does something trendy on here, but it goes over well, is 100. But outside of that, I don't really care for a lot of these variations from a lot of this old school and a lot of this West Coast style production that he does on this record. I think a lot of it just kind of ends up, showing his age a little bit. Not that I think he's too old to be rapping, but he just kind of sounds a little outside of his element, I guess.
He definitely gets a little bit all over the place on this album, but that's kind of has to be expected when you have an album that's this long. I mean, 19 tracks to go through that.
19 tracks, and that's like without bonus cuts.
And sometimes I feel kind of bad when I'm reviewing albums or talking about albums, and I'm complaining about the length, because in a way, the artist is just giving you more music. I don't want to hate on them for giving more music to their fans, but at the same time, when you're looking at how an entire project sounds, I would rather a couple tracks be shaved off and you give me something great than a bunch of filler that I'm just skipping through And, you know, some songs have great moments on them. I'm coming back to Circles. I really like that little Q-Tip feature. It's not Q-Tip's best verse by any means, but that beat switch up where it had that really nice vibe to it and Q-Tip did his little thing, that was great. But the rest of the song with the, you know, Tyler Perry acting going on throughout, that was unnecessary.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, in the abstract, I don't really care that something is 19 tracks as long as all 19 tracks are great.
Oh,
You know,
absolutely. But
the
that's not the
issue
case
is that
here, I
there's
didn't
so many
think.
cuts on here that you just don't want to be there because they're not really that good. However, I feel that Game and his producers wanted the record to flow as this cohesive thing because a lot of these songs on here, especially toward the beginning and toward the end, flow into one another. Like the beginning of one instrumental has a bit of the last instrumental in it, or, you know, one track overtly references the other in some kind of way. So, you know, I could tell that they wanted to put together something a little ambitious, something that came together into a, I don't know, a bit of a story or a picture or something. You know, not many tracks on this thing stand out as just like, you know, standalone single type songs. I mean, as much as I like that Kendrick track, for example, you know, it doesn't like have a banger chorus or anything like that. And quite a few choruses on this thing, like I said, you know, kind of have this softer or just kind of old school R&B styled sung hook, which these kinds of choruses, I mean, are long dated at this point. You don't want to hear these kinds of choruses on the radio anymore. I mean, Game is obviously indulging in this kind of his stuff, you know, for his own tastes and just kind of his own artistic style.
Yeah, he definitely lost his way a bit on this album, but I think it's, for the most part, there's a lot of good songs on here, but not a lot of incredible ones. There's not a lot of songs here that when I'm driving around, I'm really coming back to. I did like 100, even though I found Drake's voice verse just to be overly Drakey. You know how he's saying like,
A little too Drakey.
If I wasn't successful, I'd have more friends probably, and just all that type of stuff. But you know, like you kind of expect that type of thing from Drake, and it did work on the track to give it a nice summertime wavy type of vibe. And I got to shout out the production from, was it Johnny Giuliano? I think that did that. He used to work with Wiz Khalifa a lot. I think he did the beat on that. So he did a great job on that. And most of the producers did. I mean, Game, he said before this album came out that he was going to be working with a lot of big name producers and some of the people that he worked with on the first documentary, like Scott Storch, who he brought on this one as well. So the production definitely had its strong points, but I think he could have done more with his rapping. He does have some clever lines here and there, and I like his overall sound, his vocals and his delivery and his gruffness, but there weren't a lot of lyrics that really stuck out to me and had me rewinding or, you know, wanting to put Game as a top tier lyricist.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of my favorite lyrics and verses actually come from some of the guests on here. I mean, I thought Ice Cube's feature and Dr. Dre's feature were fantastic. I thought Ab-Soul's feature wasn't too bad either. Of course, Kendrick's was great. You know, but again, I kind of went into this thing expecting Game not to really wow me lyrically all that often. Really just kind of impress me more with just his brutishness, which is typically what he brings to a track.
So would you say you're satisfied with what he brought on here as far as that goes, as far as bringing the aggression, or just
As
for
far
half
as
of the
his
tracks?
lyrics and his aggression and his personality, yeah, I mean, overall, I think I'm satisfied with the record. I think I'm pretty satisfied with the record on the instrumental thing, on the instrumental side of things as well. However, where I get kind of torn is that I think some of the hooks sound dated. I think some of the songs are awful. And I think some of the features actually ruin some of these songs. You know, and some of the songs, I mean, they aren't really awful as much as they are just really underwritten. Like that hashtag track, for example, which just kind of fades out of nowhere with just more Jelly Roll screams. The track with Kanye West feels kind of underwritten too. There are some tracks on here that just don't feel as well crafted as some of the best songs on this record, and it's really obvious, and I don't know why they made it onto the track listing. Which I think is, you know, kind of one of the things that Game should have observed in the modern era of rap records. You know, I kind of feel like we don't have these lengthy rap albums anymore because people can put these kind of throwaway filler tracks that have bigger names on them, and they're just putting them out there so that they can get more notoriety as deluxe and bonus tracks. I feel like if we took maybe 5 or 6 of these songs and turned them into deluxe and bonus tracks and threw them on the back end, we would have had a way tighter, way more entertaining project.
And he's still got another disc coming. So think about that. Like, what is this whole project going to sound like together as a double disc? So that, I think his approach here was pretty interesting, to release this first disc and sell that to the people and then sell the second one. So it was a smart move
And
on
then
his
in the
behalf.
second one, even after being somewhat indifferent on this first project here, I can't really say I'm gonna just completely ignore the second disc, because looking at the feature list, looking at the producer list on that disc, it seems as if he's put in just about as much effort on the next disc too. Again, just from that feature and producer standpoint, the second disc here doesn't really look like a slouch either.
What stood out to you that you saw on the second disc as far as producers? Because I saw DJ Quick on there, and I'm a huge DJ Quick fan. So when I saw he was on there and he has a Quick's groove, like anyone who knows Quick knows he always puts a Quick's groove on his album. So to get one of those from DJ Quick, I mean, that's a blessing right there.
You know, him, and I just, you know, will.i.am as well, who I thought pulled together some of the best instrumentals on this record. And I also was looking forward to the Schoolboy Q feature. I mean, who I think out of everybody in Top Dog, he puts together some of the best features. So it'll be interesting to kind of hear him appear on this second disc on here. I mean, he really should have just got J-Rock on as well, and just got the whole Black Hippie Collective on these two discs.
I believe he's on the second disc, isn't he?
Oh, really? Okay. Well, then
I think I might have seen him on there.
You got the whole gang together.
Yeah, he definitely knows who to reach out to for this album. Like you said, he's kind of going with the trends and picking who's popular, but he does a pretty good job for the most part of incorporating people. I mean, some of these features are misses, but every now and then he gets it right and makes these good songs, like 100. That one came through. But I think some of these songs were unnecessary with the features. Like, did you really need Dej Loaf on the end of that song? I forget what, she just kind of did an outro chorus thing. That didn't really add much to the song. I don't know how necessary that was. And again, we can come back to Jelly Roll, who at first when I saw Jelly Roll was on here, I'm like, is that the fat white rapper from Tennessee? Are you familiar with him? You ever see him? He works with like Lil White and 3 6 Mafia and those guys. I'm like, why the hell is he on here? But this is Jelly Roll from, I know he's worked with Exhibit before and some other West Coast guys, producer and singer. So he came through on there. But I'm looking forward to the second disc. I want to hear what is going to sound like together, the whole thing.
Yeah, I mean, and maybe between now and then, some of these tracks in the middle of this project will grow on me or you, maybe. I don't know.
Nah. I think the growing's done for me. I've had this one in rotation for a little bit, and you know, a lot of those ones in the middle. It's not even that they're trash. Like a lot of these songs, I don't think they're all out awful. They're just not overly interesting. There's a rehash of content that I've heard before. They don't bring a whole lot. Like Just Another Day. That was one that, like, it's a pretty good song, but it's not one I'm going to keep coming back to. And at first I thought that was going to be his track from off of Compton. Remember he had the song on Compton?
Yes.
That's just Another Day. I thought it was going to be that one at first, but then it was a completely different one. And he had the line about hanging the that shooter with the Confederate flag. That line stuck out to me a little bit, because he did make an effort here and there to say some socially conscious stuff. Not a whole lot. I mean, between the girl on her rag under the bleachers and Goonies blowjob, there's a little bit of stuff there that he's trying to say.
Yeah, on tracks like that, and also on New York, New York, you know, he certainly was making the effort to, I guess, sort of, you know, pull together some sentimental moments and some personal moments.
Yeah, that was the one with the line.
Yeah, I mean, you know, the moments where it does feel like he's addressing something socially, not that it's a bad thing. You know, you get the sense more that he's not trying to make a political statement, but he's only sort of talking about it because he feels some kind of way about it personally. Mm-hmm. You know, which is good, because it leads to those moments going over well, and it keeps them from being preachy or as if like he's just kind of commenting on something that just a comment on it. You know.
Yeah, I was actually interested when I saw the track list for this, and I saw there was a song called New York, New York, because, of course, there's that Dog Pound song from back in the 90s, New York, New York, the famous video where they're stomping down all the buildings. So I didn't know I thought he might be going for some sort of weird creative approach there, but he didn't really take it that route.
No, I wasn't. I was expecting.
Am I expecting too much? Is that it?
It just kind of felt like, to me, you know, I thought that it might be some kind of diss, or maybe, you know, he might be trying to bring that G-Unit beef back up again or something. I don't know.
He did get a 50 a couple times on here. He didn't really say anything too hard. What was it he said? No 50 Cent documentary to keep the change.
Sure.
Something like that. Everybody makes mistakes. You didn't like that line, did you? I see you laughing. You didn't like that one, did you?
Keep the
change?
No, I didn't really mind that moment on the record. It's just I guess what I kind of find funny is that I think outside of some of these more emotional moments, 10 years on from the documentary, it seems like Game isn't really sort of saying anything much different than what he typically says. And that's another thing I think we should probably say about this thing before we head out on this review. Going into this record, you can expect Game's typical sort of gangsta talk, a lot of mention of Bloods and Compton, and like a lot of descriptions of places local to him. Your typical, I guess, Game lyrics. However, even though he is kind of blunt with a lot of what he says, occasionally he's poetic. I think you should probably go into this thing expecting to, kind of laugh at some of what he's saying, but not really laugh at him, kind of laugh at just, how much of a badass he builds himself up to be.
Yeah, he does have his moments on here, and now he's got the beef with Stitches going on, so I'm sure that's not good.
I think he's mostly ignoring that dude, which he should. He should just continue ignoring that dude.
Yeah, Stitches I don't think is going to be a big up-and-comer. I don't think that's going to last, but...
No, I mean, it hasn't even lasted. He had those couple songs where people were just gawking at him because he's crazy.
Yeah.
And I think Game's just going to continue to ignore him because he's just a thirsty dude.
Oh, absolutely. And I think one more thing to add on this review that you got to expect from Game is the name dropping, because he is name dropping. Every song is just all over. I mean, that's just what he does. He loves to drop names. He even got at Lupe, said Lupe was a weirdo, to which Lupe responded by posting Creep, the song Creep by Radiohead. So, I don't think he's really taking stiff jabs at these people. Just like you said, he's kind of doing what the Game always does, just throwing these little shots here and there.
Yeah. All right. I mean, like I said, I'm somewhat indifferent toward this as a total package, but there are a lot of songs on here that I thought were really good. And even though, I kind of went into this same thing, not assuming it would be as good as the documentary, and it's just kind of your typical case of hip-hop sequelitis in a lot of ways. I did feel like he went into this thing with a little bit more ambition and hunger than he typically does, and I admire it for that. And I think a lot of songs on this thing came through as good as a result of that. But still, the moments when he tries to do something trendy and tries to do something, a little, or invites some people on who actually are detriment to these songs, he actually ends up making this album worse than it needed to be, which is not really a risk that you want to take on such a long record to begin with. I mean, you're already kind of testing people's patience a little bit with 19 tracks. You're going to want to make sure that those 19 tracks are your sharpest tracks if you're going to put out that many, and we have a second disc on the way. I'm feeling a light to decent 6 on this thing.
I'm going to go with a 3.5 out of 5 on this. I really did like a lot of the production on here. I think, like you said, Game was bringing more energy than he did on his last projects. And when you compare this to that Blood Moon, like this is just so much better than that. Like volumes, way, way, way better. And I actually like this better than Jesus Piece. I like it better than the Red album. So I think this is one of his better albums, at least in recent years. So 3.5 out of 5 fits for me. And I'm curious to see what the second disc is going to sound like.
All right. And, you and I can have a bit of a discussion when that comes out, too.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me, man.
Come again?
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, thanks for coming on. I think we're going to leave it at that. I will leave a link down there in the description box where you can check out Luke's YouTube channel and see many of his reviews on various hip-hop albums that have just dropped. And again, we're probably going to have another discussion once this second disc of the documentary comes out. So I'll talk to you again soon, dude.
See you, man.
Bye. Forever.